Jessica, welcome to Alive and Well. So good to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited to talk about your books and attachment theory. And I think the ways in which our attachment styles kind of show up in patterns, especially for our audience in ways that they might not even realize, which I think is going to be really cool to get those kind of light bulb moments and then talk about, where do we go from there now that we have this awareness. Um, Before we jump in, can you kind of just give us a brief overview of attachment theory, maybe even for people who are like, I haven't even really heard this before. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so attachment theory is really well studied and it's a science and it's been around since the 1950s. And it's the study of how, as infants, we relate to our primary caregivers and in the way they attend to us and attune to us and relate to us, we can develop different attachment patterns. Originally, there were three, and then another one got added, but they're secure. So, secure babies feel like their needs are going to get met. They don't have a fear of abandonment. They walk around the world feeling pretty safe inside.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to attract other secure people. And so the other three ways of relating are called insecure types. So we have anxious, and I wrote the book Anxiously Attached Before Safe. So that kind of really goes into that population, but they have a feeling of inconsistency, the shoe is going to drop, conscious fear of abandonment, and they try to get closer and people please in relationships in order to kind of save the relationships they overgive. And then on the other end, we have avoidant. A true avoidant attachment pattern is someone who's not really in touch with their emotions because their parents weren't really attuned to them in that way.
Mm-hmm.
They're much more independent. They have a fear of losing themselves and an unconscious fear of abandonment, but a conscious
Okay.
fear of being smothered or losing themselves. And then the fourth category, which was added a little bit later, is called disorganized. Some people refer to it as fearful avoidant, but these people, when they were babies, they either experienced a lot of neglect or abuse. So we need connection. So they got stuck in this state of terror, like I need you, but I'm scared to get close. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can
Wow.
see pockets of disorganization come up. I write about pockets of my disorganization in my book, Safe. And you can live more of your life in disorganization, but they're very push pull dynamics because
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to get close and it's also hard to be alone. So I talk about in Safe, like you can identify as you're listening to me right now to one of these styles, but truly, most of us don't embed just one style. I have something called the wheel of attachment, and we embed many styles, and our patterns are in combination with who we're connecting with, and it's the
Yeah.
relational pattern. So it's nuanced and complex, which I think the listeners need to know, but
Yeah.
that's a brief overview.
Wow. Okay. I love what you're saying at the end about having different patterns show up depending on what's going on or how we're feeling and what we're sensing. Because I was going to ask you that. I'm like, I think for the most part, when I'm well resourced and I'm feeling safe, I guess, I tend to be in a feeling like I'm securely attached to the people that are around me and my husband. But then when I am not so well resourced, I notice that I kind of tend to have more avoidant tendencies and I just kind of want to like shut everyone out and do things on my own. So it's interesting to hear that. So your first book, Anxiously Attached, presumably about that pattern, the anxious attachment pattern.
And the anxious avoidant combination, uh,
Okay.
they usually attract each other. So people are fascinated by that. And that book has done tremendously well, but there were a lot of questions about a lot of things and a lot more studying. And Safe is just a deeper dive into attachment and how to heal the wounds a little bit deeper. So, yeah, 3 years later came Safe.
Wow, that's so cool. So this episode is going to drop and then tell everyone, I guess, when they can find Safe and where. And then let's kind of dive into this a little bit more.
Yeah, so you can find Safe anywhere, like on Amazon. You're going to provide a link, and the link that you're providing also gives freebies for your audience specifically, which is beyond the labels. So the attachment wheel right away in your inbox, your email inbox, and then a video of me and my mentor talking about what it feels like to move from insecurity to security. So all of that should be linked for you guys in the show notes. And Safe is everywhere. Barnes and Nobles, all the providers. It will be worldwide pretty much. Well, it's in 11 countries right now. It's continuing to sell, but you can get that anywhere, and yeah, it's
That's so
easy.
exciting. Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay. I know, at least for a lot of the people in our community, the people who come through my courses or that I work with in a one on one capacity, there's patterns that I tend to see that I would love to kind of talk about how they relate to attachment styles. So, some of those patterns are one of them is this like abdication of our own needs, right? It's just like, I'm going to suppress any need that I might have, but I'm sure going to show up for everyone around me and do all the things and go above and beyond, but not be able to even sometimes attend to my own basic needs. Can you talk a little bit about how that relates to attachment styles?
Yeah, that's more of an anxious pattern. So
Okay.
when you're an infant or a baby and you have a more anxious parent attending to you, sometimes they're available and sometimes they're lost in their own anxiety or their own world. So the baby senses inconsistency.
Okay.
So one of the things that the infant does is they leave their energetic world, they leave themselves to attend to their mother or primary caregiver's world. So they actually energetically self-abandon as a way to stay in connection. It's a brilliant adaptive strategy. And people who had more of this kind of caretaking, they grow up with a hypersensitivity of what's going on in the room, and they're able to sense what other people's needs are, but often struggle with staying connected to their own internal world and their own needs.
Yeah.
So they can people please, overextend, self abandon, and they're all brilliant adaptations. They're not things to beat yourself up with. They're literally what your system did in order to stay in connection very early on. And it's not your parents' fault either. I mean, many mothers, like my mother, was working a lot and anxious. And so sometimes she was available and sometimes she was just caught up in her own. She even had she had like postpartum depression, like she couldn't help it. But as a baby I learned, oh my god, she's not like that consistent all the time. So then in your adult relationships you're like waiting for the shoe to drop, you're waiting to be abandoned, you're waiting to be left. And one of the adaptive ways is we hyper focus on the other, we meet the other person's needs, and we want to keep them close in order to feel
Mm. Yeah. It all makes a lot of sense when you think about it, right? When you like can start to see the patterns.
safe.
So for someone who tends to run that type of pattern, right? Making sure like I'm good as long as everyone around me is good and I'm taking care of everyone else. And at the same time, I'm also really anxious and worried that the other shoe is going to drop. What are some like practical ways you can start to heal that? Like once you're noticing that you tend to run this pattern?
Yeah, I mean, some of the ways is to start to acknowledge that this isn't a brilliant adaptive strategy and not to beat
Yeah.
yourself up around it, you know. But I think one of the ways to heal that is to go back to the original wound. I think a lot of people are not aware that their parents abandoned them in these small moments
Yeah.
or weren't able to be emotionally consistently present enough for them to internalize the safety. And
Yeah.
so, in a therapeutic relationship or what I call an anchoring relationship, we go back to the younger parts and we try to embody or get the information around the sensations in our body around what that would feel like. So if your heart drops to the floor, if you've got a tightness in your chest, if you've got things going on in your body, we now know this is where wounds are stored in the
Yeah.
body. So you really want to be looking at those sensations and developing something called interoception, which I go into detail. Like what you're asking me is like a question I could spend like 3 hours
Yeah.
answering, because it's a process to learn how to go into the body and learn where these wounds are stored and how to hold them and heal them and move them, and to bring consciousness to the original inconsistency if we're talking about the anxious attachment.
Yeah. Wow. And then how about for women who notice they tend to have adapted in a different way on the other end, maybe of that spectrum, where it's like, I'm a strong, independent woman. I don't need anybody. I do everything. I get my own. Where does that, or how does that tend to form as it relates to attachment?
Yeah, so that's either an avoidant protector. Uh,
Okay.
I developed, and I talk about that a lot, or true avoidant attachment, which are two very different things.
Okay.
So, like an avoidant protector would be someone more like me who's more anxious, but because I wasn't getting my needs met, I became self sufficient and independent, but that's really not like my need is to gravitate towards warm connection. But the other side is avoidant people who had parents who didn't really emotionally attune to them at all, struggle with empathy and certain relational skills because they weren't given to them at all. So they become super independent and self sufficient as a way to stay connected to
Yeah.
their parents and society at large. And society at large supports this type of relating in the world. The
Hmm.
problem is, and I talk a lot about the hemispheres of the brain and I geek out in science and safe, but when you're more avoidant, you're more left shifted in the hemisphere. And the problem is you're pretty lonely in that state. So
Wow.
when you're operating more from that place, you're not really connected to your right hemisphere as much. And you can feel like, oh my God, I'm accomplishing so much. I'm super independent, but I'm pretty lonely. There's not a lot of a relational connection in that area.
Yeah. Let's talk about connection because I hear it. Wait, it's like how we attach to others, how we connect with them. Can you just talk about the importance of connection and why it plays such a role in our attachment styles and then in our healing of those patterns?
Yeah, so connection is a biological imperative. So when we're born, we need connection. And that's Stephen Porges's work and his words. But we need connection just as much as we need food and shelter. Like we
Yeah.
as humans are still developing out of womb, and we need to stay connected to our primary caregivers. It's literally life or death.
Hmm.
When our caregivers are not there or are going through a lot, it feels like life or death in our nervous system. And we store a lot of that memory in our bodies, in our fascia, in our gut, in our health, our heart, in our bodies. So how we were connected to and the quality of our connection basically determines the paradigm in which we walk around in this life.
Hmm.
So if we had really quality connection and emotional availability and attunement, we've internalized a lot of safety. And those are the ingredients for secure attachment. But if we had parents that were either anxious or avoidant or struggling themselves and
Yeah.
couldn't connect with us enough regularly or offer that sense of safety, it's actually a ventral state that's a nervous system state. We will grow up with a sense that we're not safe in the world and this will live in our body.
Hmm.
And we tend to then attract people who then also repeat patterns. And I talk about the familiar patterns that we repeat. So it's pretty nuanced, but connection is everything. And we can't heal without healthy connection and to ourselves and others. And so learning that and getting those tools around that is very important for me as someone who studies this and is trying to kind of get it out to the world.
Yeah. Wow. As you're sharing that, it makes a lot of sense to me how dependent we are on our caregivers when we're born, like you said, life and death. But then as we grow and now we're like busy and have jobs and kids and families and all the things, how important is it still to have like friendships? I'm just thinking of so many women who are listening, who feel like they don't have either time for friendships or their friendships aren't what they used to be pre having kids and a family. But as it relates to our need for connection, how important is that?
I think that community is everything. As I started to heal myself, I realized that
Mm.
I actually got a lot of friendship intimacy and connection from my community.
Mm.
And, as someone who identified as more anxiously attached, obviously I wrote the book. We tend to focus on romantic relationships to meet
Yeah.
our needs.
Okay.
And a big like reorienting to me was getting my needs met through non-primary romantic relationships and learning how to develop true vulnerability and intimacy with my friends. And I have to tell you, I feel so much more supported in the world.
Hmm.
And I have so much space for so many deep, close connections now by doing the work that I'm not just dependent on one person, right? And if that one person can't give me what I need, my whole world falls apart. But when you develop what I call anchoring relationships and expand and have that community, you thrive. That's how we're biologically wired to thrive. We're not supposed to be in alone. We're not even supposed to be a mother with all this pressure without aunts and parents and friends and people to help raise our young ones. So we're really wired to be in so much more community than our society kind of sets us up for.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of want to talk about parenting a little bit too, because I think this is interesting. So you shared that so much of the patterns that we end up forming, or these adaptations we take on, happen when we're infants, right? When we're really, really young. For those listening who have either really young children, or maybe their kids are a little bit older, maybe they're like, I don't know, I have a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old, or my kids are in high school or they're grown. Can you talk a little bit about, one, the kinds of things that we can do to help our children feel safe enough to form secure attachments? And then if we have kids who aren't infants anymore, is it that it's like too late, or is there still work that we can do and be aware of?
Yeah, it's never too late to
Mhm.
what I call earn security. I mean, I earned it later in life, but due to neuroplasticity and everything we know about science, it's also never too late to repair with your children.
Yeah.
I was working with a client not that long ago. Well, she's still a current client, but she had a child and she had postpartum, and she had her first child and maybe favored him, and the second child she felt like maybe he didn't get what he needed as much. And
Mhm.
we went and revisited with him, and there was some deep healing that happened. But something in the book that I talk about is called rupture and repair.
Okay.
And I think if you're listening, you're like, oh my God, like I was an anxious mom, or I've been an avoidant dad, or the more that you do your own work and attend to what's going on inside, there's a mirroring effect of your own emotional capacity to attend differently to your children. So
Mhm.
it's a beautiful thing that as you do your work, you become more emotionally available. And as you become more emotionally available, you heal what maybe you couldn't show up for before. And it's never too late to repair any of that. It's quite beautiful when you see parents do that later on in life. And you could only give your kids what you know,
Right.
and you are doing the best you can. And maybe your parents didn't slow down to heal. So you're just passing on what you know. And if you
Yeah.
take the time to slow down and heal, you can pass through and repair and give so much more at any age. So it's
Yeah.
really, really hopeful.
Wow, it's such good news. And it's so encouraging. And so it's never too late. And I love that, the idea that it just begins with us, right? Like when we can do the work and start to feel safe, then there's such a powerful trickle down to that. I'm kind of curious, as it relates to like parenting, what kind of attachment patterns have an impact on how we parent, that might be interesting to people listening? Like maybe how we choose to discipline, or the things that trigger us, or how we, even, I don't know, I think kids go through stages where it's like they favor one parent over the other. I can only imagine how our attachment styles can show up in all the different ways in which we parent.
I think maybe one of the themes in Safe is about how we listen. And I
Okay.
think in terms of parenting, and if you buy the book, but like one of the things that builds trauma is an inability to process our day with our parent or another. So it's not necessarily the traumatic event itself. Like traumatic events happen all the time. Like I got bullied at school, or so and so said this to me and it hurt my feelings. It's when parents can't sit next to their kids and say, okay, tell me, let's process this,
Yeah.
and allow the child to feel their emotional experience without trying to fix them, without having an agenda, without taking over, but actually emotionally just be with that child in the process, and actually allow them to be sad, or allow them to be uncomfortable, or allow them to be angry, and be with them in that experience. Then they're learning to process what they're going through, and you're giving them the gift of allowing them to have their experience fully. And I
Yeah.
think parents often, because they love their kids, they want to fix. They get angry, they get frustrated. Listen, we got a lot of things going on in the day, but the best thing you can do is slow down with your child and
Yeah.
be with them and allow them to share, and not do anything but hold the space for them and let them move
Mm.
through their emotional process. And I talk about doing that in the book with a co-anchor and in your own personal work. And I think when you have a person that does that for you
Yeah.
well, you can start to do that for another well. And I think that's the most important thing we can do for our children is learn how to listen and hold their emotional experiences better.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We always talk about, how resilient our kids are. We hear things like that. It's like we know our kids can handle a lot. Um, and also like, especially when you talk about as it relates to trauma, handling it alone versus handling it with us is such a different experience. You mentioned abandonment earlier, and I'd love to come back to that a little bit because I think sometimes with things like even the word trauma or abandonment, we have this mental picture of what that needs to look like in order for it to have an impact on us, right? Like the capital T traumas, or whatever that might look like for abandonment. But can you talk a little bit about what abandonment can look like as it would have had an impact on us?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important word. Okay, so, and I talk about this a lot in the book, but most of the time we are abandoned by our parents because they're just not emotionally available and
Yeah.
aware.
Yeah.
And so many clients come to me and like, I have loving parents, I had a great childhood, and all of that is true. And if our parents didn't get what they needed and they were preoccupied with success or work or stress or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and they weren't able to be emotionally present enough for us, there's actually a level of abandonment in there that is so painful that most people are not in touch with. I know I wasn't in touch with it. I wasn't in touch with it until someone could emotionally show up for me. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I needed. And my parents, who loved me so much, didn't have the capacity.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's when we start putting the pieces together. And I think that's like most people don't recognize that and they
Mhm.
don't understand the depth of that and they protect their parents, which I
Yeah.
get. And this isn't about blaming your parents, it's about recognizing I actually didn't get a need met because my parents didn't know how to meet it, because they weren't modeled that, because that wasn't passed down to them. And so now I
Yeah.
need, build anchoring relationships and feel what it feels like to have that emotional presence holding me. So I think that's, I talk about it, and it is at the heart of more of an avoidant experience, is that parents are checking the boxes and getting us to school and making sure our grades are good and like
Yeah.
making sure we're accomplished and making sure we look okay, but they're not emotionally connecting in this deep way where they're like really seeing into us and they're really seeing
Yeah.
into what's going on in our body and what's going on in our inner world. So we're actually being emotionally abandoned. And most people don't understand that until they start to do the work.
Yeah. Yes. Do you find too, I'm just curious for people that you work with their attachment styles, as you start to get into maybe some of like the origin of a lot of this and they start to see or notice things like you're saying about how they were raised and it's changing their perception of their parents and all these things. Is there like a grieving part of that?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I write about that too, like hello grief for myself too.
Okay.
I mean, because we are protectively in denial
Yeah. Yeah.
until we experience true holding and true attunement. And then we're like, oh my God, like this part of me hasn't gotten that. And then I very much think that healing attachment wounds a big piece of that. So I talk about in safe, like we seek out our familiar. So we'll seek
Mhm.
out the same people who will treat us in the familiar way that we're used to, and we'll repeat patterns and we'll get stuck in trauma bonds. What we really need to do is go back to the root and grieve what we didn't get,
Wow.
so that we're not trying to recreate it or resolve it, but we're actually attending to the reality of the event. So grief is very much part of this work.
Hmm. We've talked a lot about connecting with others as a big part of our healing. Can you talk a little bit too? I'm just curious about like what we can do with ourselves, like connecting to ourselves, connecting to our own bodies. Like how much of a role does that play? How can we show up for ourselves in a lot of these ways that other people haven't shown up for us?
Yeah, I mean, in the book, I talk about building interoception and I provide the readers with somatic meditations, and they're not just in the book. I have them in my on my website, so you can go and
Okay.
practice going into your body and connecting with your sensational experiences. And I talk about how sensations are related to memory.
Yeah.
So I think that doing the practices of attuning inward and also having other people attune to you, you're starting to build a missing developmental link that didn't happen,
Yeah.
which is our inherent ability to have interoception. So, an ability to feel into our bodies and understand sensations and understand what's going on inside of us.
Yeah.
So, I provide the readers with these meditations so they can start to build the missing neuro circuitry that they might not have gotten from their primary caregivers.
Wow, it's interesting. Um, how about needs that weren't met that aren't necessarily body based per se? Like I'm thinking of the need to be heard, and you were talking about listening, like things like that. How can we? Is there like a responsibility or something that we can do on our own in that sense also, or is it more a practice of trusting and being vulnerable and having others hear us?
I mean, it's both. It's
Yeah.
having the experience of feeling really heard and seen, which is powerful. And then it's grieving the fact that that didn't happen for you.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Um, For let's kind of like zoom out for a minute. And I would just love for the people listening who can start to see themselves in some of these patterns and the impact that it might be having, and they want to pick up the book um, until it's in their hands. What are some like things they can start doing or noticing today or in the short term that can start to prepare them, I guess, for the greater journey of healing?
Yeah, I mean, starting to understand where your attachment patterns are, like I said in the beginning. If you do buy the book, they're downloadable. I give a downloadable PDF, which is beyond the attachment styles, which I explain the attachment wheel.
Yeah.
And in the book, before you get the book, but like you can start to see, well, with mom, I would had security, and then sometimes she was anxious, so I'd slide up the wheel here, and with dad, maybe he was more avoidant, but only sometimes. And then, my Aunt Lucy was dangerous and brought some disorganization, or my sister was chaotic. And you
Yeah.
start to understand like that you have your own wheel. And then these patterns get recreated in your adult relationships. So if you buy the book now, you'll get the downloadable wheel and that link. If you don't buy the book, I think it's just starting to give yourself compassion, starting to understand different attachment styles, reminding yourself that you're not just one,
Mhm.
um, and that healing these attachment wounds happens in relationships, and that the quality of our relationships are really important. So go through your Rolodex, think about who in your life is non-judgmental, warm, shows up for you emotionally, and keep those people close to you, because those people are really, I call them our anchors, and they're the people that you can do the work with, and they're the people who you start to internalize to build inner security, which is one of the goals of the book.
Oh, that's so good. I love it. Yeah, so you guys check that out in the show notes and then grab the book. I think this is something that has far greater reach in our life than we even realize as far as how much it's impacting. And I also think it's something that, as part of the human experience, we all have growing and healing to do in how we attach to others. So thanks so much. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for putting this work out into the world and making it so accessible for us. Even the wheel, you guys, like check that out. Because I think those are such practical tools that you can start to really connect some dots. And like Jessica's saying, start to understand maybe how and why these things are showing up. But then also once you notice them, and then your reading is safe, you can start to really do the work to heal it for yourself, and then that trickle down effect for the people that you love is really powerful.
Yeah, that's great. And here, this is what the book looks like. And this is like
Great.
not a finished copy. I don't have my finished copy yet, but and yeah, and I'm on Instagram, Jessica Baum LMHC. And if you read the book and it resonates with you, please reach out. I'm saying that on every podcast. I do try to respond to everyone, because I really want to know, and I'll do my best. I will do my best to try to respond. And yeah, you should have the link to the free gifts. And yeah, I think knowledge is power. And
Mm, beautiful. Well, thanks again for being here. Really appreciate you.
thank you. You